Hello everyone, I'm Colin Canet. You know, I've learned some things in woodworking the hard way, and one of the things I learned the hard way was that all squares are not square. Let me show you what I mean. In my early days of woodworking, it was really more home renovation that I was doing, and I had two squares. I had a carpenter's square and I had a combination or a tri-square. And they worked just fine for me. But when I got into doing some serious woodworking, I decided to pick up this lovely wooden-handled woodworker's square. And that was the start of all of my problems. Let me explain to you why. When I started acquiring my machinery, jointer, table saw, and so on, what I was finding was when I was running boards through my jointer, one side would be a nice straight line, but when I turned it over, there'd be a big gap in the top. And then I would flip them around and back and forth, and I always had some sort of a gap somewhere. They never seemed to line up. I would reset my jointer, run more wood, and nothing lined up. It was a very, very frustrating time. Then one day, I happened to purchase a steel square, a solid steel square. And if you've been following my channel, you've seen me use this a lot. And one day I happened to reset my jointer fence with this, and I realized that my jointer fence was once again not set properly. So I reset my jointer fence with this, and I happened to be running some wood, and guess what? It all lined up. Now that day that wood lined up for me for gluing, what it made me do, it was an aha day for me because I took this steel square and I went over and I checked my lovely wooden handled woodworker square and found that it was off. And then I took it and aligned it to my wonderful tri-square or combination square, and I discovered that this was off by 1/8 of an inch. And it was then that I realized there's something wrong with these squares. Let me show you what happens with some of these squares. So what woodworker wouldn't want a lovely wooden handled square? It just looks beautiful. It's steel on one side and wood on the other, and it's even got brass in here. Here's the problem with wooden handled squares is because wood expands and contracts, what it does, depending on how this is manufactured, and they may not all do it, but this one does do it, because the wood expands and contracts depending on the amount of moisture in there, what happens is the steel blade on this moves a little bit. So sometimes it can move down, sometimes it can move up, and once in a while it's in a perfect spot. But generally, I never ever use this square anymore because I can't trust it. And if you go back and look on all of my videos, you'll see that it has a place on my wall here. It's now a wall hanger, and that's the only use of it because it doesn't give me accurate readings. Now, when it comes to combination squares, there are good squares and there are some that are not so good. And basically, it's one of those that comes down to price. The more you pay, the better quality you get. Now, you can get some inexpensive ones that are okay, and they'll be okay for a while. Some of them I've purchased them myself because I didn't know any better, that actually have, this one has brass, but some of them have plastic in here, and if you tighten them too much, the plastic warps and it doesn't hold the blade properly. It holds it askew. So there's that. But this particular one is a somewhat inexpensive square. And if you purchase a good quality one, the Star's a good, Starette's a good brand name, you'll pay in the hundreds of dollars, $150, $200 or more for a really good combination square. Now, for me, I'd just as soon have steel squares that are $15, $20, $30. They're always accurate and they always work fine. So I almost never use this in woodworking because it's off. And one of the other reasons that it's off is because this is steel, but this part is aluminum. Why? Because it's much easier to cast aluminum. And when you have a tri-square that you're moving back and forth, depending on how you hold this, this aluminum tends to wear. So that's a fault. So now you can get this kind of action happening so that it doesn't sit properly in here because there's wear from it moving back and forth. The other problem is the way this grips and the way of the design of this slot in here. The only thing holding this to the vertical piece here is this little bit of aluminum. And let me show you what this looks like. All this is, that's it right there. It's a little catch, and it also wears. So the problem with these, you have to be very careful if you're using tri-squares or combination squares, because they may or may not be accurate. So the way to check it, I'm going to show you how to align and check all of your squares. So what I have set up here is a piece of wood. This could be anything, MDF, could be plywood, something that's good and rigid. And what you really want to have is a factory edge, preferably along the top, for if you're going to do it vertically like I am. You could lay it on your bench and do the same thing. Now what I'm going to do is lay my square on top of this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, on the inside now, and I'm going to show you why I'm doing that on the inside, I'm going to mark a line here and another line down here. Now to check this square, all I need to do is turn it around this way, and what I want to do is line up that mark there, and if it lines up with this mark down here, which it does, then that square is good. Now I've got a whole bunch of squares. In fact, I've got another carpenter's square. And once you get one square that you know is square, you can actually use it then to line up or to check your other squares. And it's very simple to do. You just hold it up, lay it down on your bench or whatever, and do that. Now you can do the same thing with your small squares. If you're not sure if your first one was right, you can take that same mark, align that up just like that, draw another line down there, flip it around, line up that top mark, and if the bottom mark lines up, and it does, then that square is also square. Now, some of you with some sharp eyes might have noticed there's a little tiny dent on there. Let me show you what that's about. Now there's a little bit closer shot, and you can see that little dent in there, and what that dent is from is a punch. And this square that I had was not square, and there's two ways that you can adjust them. If these two arms are too close together, you know, if there's a gap in here, so if there was a gap in here somewhere, you can actually open these up. And the way you do that is by using that punch and putting a little, just pound it in there. And it may take you 2 or 3 or 4 times. You might get it in one. You have to be careful you don't overdo it. But what happens, this expands the metal down here, so then it tends to want to push those arms apart because you're expanding that metal. So it tends to want to do that, and it does it very, very small, so you just need a little bit of, usually just a little bit of movement to get them. Now the other thing is, if they're already like this and you need to bring them back down, so then you would put the punch, you would put it up here, because what happens in this area when you put that punch in here, what it does is it expands this metal up here, so then it moves those two wings, instead of being like that, are going to go together. They're going to be edged down like this because you're expanding that metal up there, so it's going to tend to want to move those together like that. So that's how you can actually adjust your own steel squares. But let me show you why it's important where you mark. So there's that square, and you can see, and you obviously know when you put it on wood like that, you need to put it at a little bit of an angle so that it's flat along the top, but then along the side. When you look at the inside, of course, you know the inside is going to be nice and tight, and that's where you want to mark. You want to mark on the inside because when you use the outside, here's what happens. You've got this and you've got this. And if you're out of line, look at that. You can see those two lines, and that didn't take me much effort. That's just off a little bit, and if you're not careful, you can draw a line straight down there and think that it's the dimension that you need, when in fact it might be that one. So when you mark on the inside, there is no, it's right tight up against the wood all the way. You can only get one line, and you get a nice straight line that's in a line with the square, and you don't have to worry that your pencil was sort of one way or another because of that small little innocent gap that happens there. And that's why I love that square, because it doesn't matter. It's always flat against the wood. You don't have to worry that you're using one side or the other because it's always flat. Now, there's one other little thing that you can do to check your squares as well. And I put this in front of me so you can see it because it's clear plastic. This is an engineer's square, and they don't cost a lot of money. You have to kind of look around to make sure that you're getting a good quality one, because there's probably some of these that aren't perfect either. But that is another way of checking your squares. Now, I've never seen an engineer's square that's off. For some reason, they always seem to be able to get these perfect, and because they're plastic, they don't change, the moisture doesn't change them. But you can use that to also check your squares and find out if they're accurate. And there's a bonus that it has a 45. This one has a 45. You can also get 30 degree, 60 degree, but this is a 45 degree one. So you can also use it for your 45 degree angles to make sure you're getting perfect 45 degree angles. Well, as you've probably already figured out, I'm pretty passionate about getting decent quality squares and making sure that you know that they're square, because I learned that the hard way. And if you look just above my finger, you'll see that the lovely woodworking square with the woodworking handle or the wood handle is back on the shelf where it belongs, because I can't get an accurate reading from that. And you know, you don't need to spend a ton of money on squares. If you do invest in something a little bit more and get one with a little bit thicker handle that lays flat, you will never be disappointed that you spent a little bit extra and got a decent square. But you know what? These work just fine. And now that you know how to adjust them and what you can do, if they are a little bit off, and you can fix them, and you know when you do that, they're fixed for life. You never have to readjust them. They will always stay the same way, and you will get better and more accurate straight and square angles. I'm Colin Canet for Woodwork Web. Thanks for watching.